Hi, I'm Eric, or Oksami, doing another beat breakdown. I am honestly so shocked that I got that much positive feedback on my last one, and I'm really grateful for all of the support. Today I'm going to look at one of my more recent releases called Cityscapes.
Wear it on my chest like so many scarlet letters, yeah. I try to escape them, but I cannot run away. It always catches up. Life is so dumb that way. Feelings are stupid.
With this tutorial and future ones, I want to show you how I think about translating abstract ideas from your brain into the workstation. And today I'll be going over how I make a song feel sampled without any traditional samples and humanize my sample libraries. For Cityscapes, I started off with 3 influences.
Then we gon' be alright.
Nigga, we gon' be alright. Nigga, we gon' be alright.
In all 3 of these examples, you hear a combination of some sampled vocal chops, a pretty simple sub bass, and very tasteful sidechain. I try to recreate this in Cityscapes with my own flair, and I'll show you how. The obvious way to get the vocals is to look for some vocal samples, but I typically don't like spending too much time looking for samples and having to worry about like copyright issues, so I usually make my own. One of the ways I do this is with some processing and being really particular about how I set my attack and release on these instruments. So for me, the vocals end up being a omnisphere patch here. It's just part of their human voices library, and it's really dense. So you can tell it's got a little ways to go, but I kind of like the timbre of the voices, and we are going to try and process this into something that can be used. The first thing I think about when I listen to sample tracks is that the attacks and the releases of those samples are always near 0 because you're literally like jump cutting them together. Obvious thing first is to make sure we don't have any weird tails. We get rid of the reverb here. We bring down release to 0, bring down attack to 0. So now when I play this, it comes in immediately. We can emphasize this a bit more by moving the start of the sample a little bit further in, so there's really no time for the voices to reach their full volume. It's like we literally cut out a little part of another track. This is still a little bit too muddy for us, so we're gonna go and put in a little high pass here, and the classic, the OTT, which is a crazy multi-band compressor that kind of just squashes the sound. And you can see it's really different from when we started, and this ends up being a lot easier to use. It also has this nice hiss that I wanted. Another thing that I do with these choirs, make sure that the velocities are different. As I switch between the chords, you'll notice that it sounds slightly different each time. Like kind of the sound they're making is different. So it just adds interest, and again, really contributes to the sampled feeling where you wouldn't just be taking samples from one part of the track, you would like take cuts from all over. So just another little small thing you can do. Yeah, that's about it for the vocals here. And then the sub bass. The sub bass isn't that interesting. It's just an Ableton stock sub, which is basically just a sine wave, and it just sounds like this. It's generally pretty clean. You can add some distortion and stuff to taste, but I ended up not really doing much with it. Put together, we have a little bit of side chain so that the kick can come through. So now we have a pretty nice foundation. So now I get to do a little bit more creative decoration and bring in things that I like. I make an intro just playing on the chords with a little bit of a rhythmic theme here that sounds like this. One last trick you can do with this velocity plugin is to cap basically the velocities, since sometimes these sample libraries will have slides and weird sounds at either the highest range or the lowest range. We can make sure those don't get played. And if you, for example, just drew in the MIDI notes, I think by default on Ableton they start at like 100 velocity. You can add randomness so that you get some sort of low-level humanization. If you are, without a keyboard or just want to quickly add some humanization with the dynamics of your sample libraries, this is a really, really good way to do so. One other trick for humanization you can use, again, if you don't have a MIDI keyboard or don't want to play it out live, is to basically take your quantized sound. So you can see most of the stuff is on the grid here. You can open up the groove pool, drag the clip in. You can drag this groove onto the MIDI clip, which will apply it, and then you can increase this randomness to change the timing. So if I turn it to 100, you can hear the notes are starting to be like staggered and not playing at the same time, even though in the grid they're completely aligned. So again, all these really quick and easy workarounds to get your sounds a little bit more human, since you're not going to be playing, perfectly on time. And second half of the intro, bring in some guitar with a little, I guess, arpeggiated layer on the top. Kind of subtle, but adds a little bit of air to it. So then we repeat this theme through the main section so that there's a little more going on. I add a little bit more movement and sort of beef up the vocals with a string section. And lastly, we have a harp that sort of just plays through. So put all together, it sounds like this. So yeah, that's basically it. And I hope you learned something from watching this. I am planning a lot more breakdowns, or hopefully some things with a little more structure in the future. And I am very open to suggestions and tips on what you want to learn from, or what you find maybe isn't talked about so much, because I think there's a lot of people who can tell you how a compressor works better than I can. But yeah, that'll be all for today. Thank you so much.
Wear it on my chest like so many scarlet letters, yeah. I try to escape them, but I cannot run away. It always catches